Give me one second. All right. Well, JD, thanks so much for joining me on the Men's Mental Health Podcast. My name is Dr. Dan Bates. I am the host of this podcast and very glad to have you with us. But for those who haven't met you, aren't familiar with you, tell us about who is JD Tremblay, if I said your name correctly, and then what led you to write the book Hunger for More in Life?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Dr. Bates. My name is JD Tremblay, and I'm the director of high performance at Hungry Warrior Academy. I am a Christian man after all, and I take the man's mental health quite seriously with our programs, and we help the men through our DECA system.
Okay, awesome. Okay, now you said am I just butchering your last name, Tremblay? Am I
Yeah,
just
no, it's not
destroying it?
butchered, but yeah, it is Tremblay. Yeah, it's a
Okay,
French name. Yeah.
that's right, because you're located in Canada.
Correct. Yeah, I'm French Canadian. Yes.
Okay, that's where the accent's coming from. My American ear is hearing it.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely. Yep, I am French Canadian. Yep.
Okay, and just a total curveball, but what are the uniquenesses of French Canadian from French in terms of linguistics and speaking, and are they
Yeah,
are they pretty much the same?
well, when the French sent over some individuals to this new world, they did not send the most educated individuals, and so it became somewhat of a bastardized French. So we slang a lot of words such as in Becos. So it's a back house for English in England, but in order to speak from the French to the English, then we would be bastardizing all of our French and merging it with some connotation of English. Another one is a fellow. So in Quebec, we would have un flot, but mon flot is my um, my son,
Hmm.
and a fellow in English from England is also your son, but in a different term.
Okay, fascinating. Okay, I'll have to ask my friend about that. He's from France, and so um uh let's see. And
They
it
have
was
difficulty understanding us.
do they really?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've been to France many times, and
Yeah.
sometimes it gets for some regions of France, it gets quite aggravating at a point where they don't understand us if we speak really, really fast. So we
Hmm.
even have to switch to English sometimes.
Okay,
And we're both
interesting.
speaking French. We're supposed
Now,
to.
would a French person do better in Canada, or would a Canadian do better in France?
Well, I would say it's depending on the level of how débrouillard you are or resourceful, right? If you are resourceful and you are patient enough and you are able to respect the other person based on your differences,
Yeah.
then I would say that it's based on these criteria. It's not necessarily based on a general term.
Okay, that was a nice, safe answer. Very diplomatic.
While characterizing an entire population just based on one singular individual that mispronounced certain restaurants or is unfair for the entire
Okay.
population.
All right. Very respectful. Very enlightened of you. I like it. I appreciate it. Now with the book, I really the I got a chance to look at it. You sent me a copy, and I appreciate you doing that. And I thought it was a really interesting read. But I noticed the title kind of stood out to me of, you use the phrase hunger for more. What was your thinking behind that title, and does that kind of communicate kind of a big idea from the book?
For sure, hunger is something that can be seen as food. But the way I see it is in terms of a need. And so
Mm.
it's a need for everybody to be hungry. Everybody should have that level of hunger in their life. There are people that overeat. If we're using the analogy of eating, there are people that undereat, and there are people that have all of these opportunities. A beautiful table of opportunities is set in front of them, and they are not partaking on that table and prefer to use a victim mentality, so to speak, and ruin or sabotage their entire life. And so when you're
Hmm.
looking at the analogy of hunger, and definitely it paints a picture and a broader spectrum in terms of how we should comport ourselves towards the opportunities that are ahead of us. For the book itself, it stemmed because it was part of your questioning. It was from the story of David and Goliath, and whether Christian or not, the audience would remember that it's a small boy who
Hmm.
went and defeated a giant. So, if we dive deeper into this story, this boy named David was at the bottom of the food chain in terms of status. He was a shepherd. So at the time, the shepherds were at the bottom of the food chain. And they were the last to eat. And if they were going to eat, they they had no formal training to be warriors. They were not in line to be kings.
Hmm.
So David had some brothers. Those brothers, if we read in the Bible, they had the equipment. We were assuming they had some level of training to become warriors. They had the status or the title of warriors. And then also they had the community of warriors. We're also assuming that they went to war before, and therefore they had some level of expertise or experience in battle, therefore qualifying them by all spheres as a warrior. And yet, when the giant came and defied their god, which was supposed to be uh, because, well, Saul was the first king, so they were just getting out of a theocracy, which is that God was leading and not a king. So Saul was the first king. They still were not hungry enough to stand in front of Goliath. And so the only one that we can notice in the Bible was, again, David. And so that's why, again, wrote the book so that people can get a an idea of why I was able to accomplish such amazing feats that seem quite phenomenal in the world, but yet are just another giant, just another mountain, which a lot of people have climbed large mountains, if we're using the metaphor of a mountain. But how many people are really hungry warriors versus just a simple warrior?
Right. And you have accomplished quite a few things, some amazing things in your life, and we'll get into some of those later on. Um, and I guess as I hear you share, hunger, it almost sounds like from a psychological perspective, the things that stand out to me is a term used called zest, which it makes me think of a zest bar from the soap. I don't know if you have that in Quebec, but
Yeah, I had that in the military. Yeah, that was my
okay,
soap.
okay.
Yeah.
But it's an actual psychological term that you can measure and study. And so essentially the idea is that you have a passion for something. And it's actually a key part of flourishing and a key part of well-being. And so if you have a passion and you're aiming for something and working hard for something, it keeps this strong sense of vitality. And so I guess when I hear the way you describe hunger, it hits on those notes of vitality, zest, passion, drive. And it seems like you have a really strong passion, zest, drive in your life, which, sometimes it can be the way can be smooth for you to kind of realize those things, but there can also be challenges too, and there's moments of testing. Were there some defining moments that made you question yourself or made you realize you needed change um, under challenge, you know?
Yeah, definitely. My life started out being challenging.
Hmm.
So I was bullied as a child because I was highly successful. I was a child star. I was in my country. Um, well, in all countries, we did not have social media, but in mine, we only had four channels and on TV. And I was on one of them every single night doing commercials. And so I was quite successful. Other kids, well, it's normal. And now that I see it, and there was a lot of jealousy. When I reached the age of 14, my parents got divorced. And
Mm.
so there was a lot of commotion in the house. My parents were looking for their own buoys, so to speak.
Hmm.
So they were unable to help me in that sense. And so I understood right there, as per your question, that it was an environment that I needed to change. And instead of seeing it as a victim mentality, I just saw it as a trampoline to propel me to the next stage of my life, somewhat the catalyst that would bring me to the next portion, the next
Hmm.
chapter. And so at the age of 17 years old, I made it could have been seen as a difficult decision, yet to me it seemed a rational one to join the military even before I reached the age of adulthood in my country. I couldn't even drink a beer, but I could hold a gun and defend my
Right.
country. So
That's amazing. Okay. And so you said you grew up as a child actor
yeah,
and were in TV shows. And I think that or was it TV shows or in commercials?
yeah, commercials. Yeah, I did a lot
Okay.
of commercials. Yeah.
Okay. And I think that can actually be very, I don't know, in the wrong conditions, that can be very damaging psychologically for a young person to be a child actor. I mean, you look at like several noteworthy cases, you know, where folks would come out in adulthood and that they said, you know, they were abused or mistreated or whatever as a child actor. And so that was kind of a test and kind of an obstacle, I would imagine.
Well, being in the spotlight constantly is difficult. When you're
Right.
going to a store and people are remembering you for what you did on television, not necessarily the person that you are, not understanding that you're just a child. You're trying to cope with life, you have emotions,
Right.
you're not really knowledgeable of the world outside. You've never really traveled. My parents were not rich by any means, unless we're
Hmm.
looking at the standards of third world countries. But
Hmm.
we were on one single income. My dad was a teacher, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom.
Hmm.
So by no means were we extremely rich. My dad did the best that he could with what he had at the time. But again, being in the spotlight constantly is what can drive a lot of people insane because now you have no idea where some attack can come from and you have no
Hmm.
idea how to regulate your system, and then you have no mentors or no money to pay for those mentors to somewhat coach you or guide you on how to deal with that spotlight. And so that's why a lot of individuals would turn to certain unhealthy coping mechanisms such as drugs, alcohol, or even behavioral addictions such as gambling, video games, or even pornography. So for me, I turned to pornography. So I talk about it openly because now it's gone out of my life, but that was a difficult portion of my life because
Hmm.
again, that was my coping mechanism. So,
When did that start? Was that when you were a young person?
yeah, 12 years old. So again, nothing happened to me with my parents or
Hmm.
anyone. There was no sexual trauma. It was mostly and I would see it as a healthy gr- um, it was a healthy situation that happened naturally, where when you reach the age of 12 years old, it's more the immaturity
Hmm.
that led to me veering towards these carnal desires. You reach the age of puberty, and there's lots of change. You see women differently. And so I was hiding. My parents had no idea that I was indulging in this content. And even then, I would say that back then, it was difficult to access that content because, again, only four channels, no social media. Um, so,
Hmm.
and I did not even grow up with a computer into my house. We did not even have a cell phone until I reached the military. So again, it's quite difficult to reach this level of content, as nowadays the children, in terms of how the video games are geared, or even pornography,
Oh yeah.
it would be really, really difficult for a kid to get out of this unhealthy cycle, because,
Hmm.
again, the tools are completely different to acquire a client, so to speak. And it's free. So it's one of those drugs that destroy your mental health. And they've done studies on the brain as well with EEGs. And they showed that it's, well, the study was based on for pornography users, and they showed that the brain of a porn addict is less active than even someone who is doing hard drugs such as cocaine or heroin. And so
Hmm.
uh, that is a free drug, if we can qualify it as such. And it's hurting the brain of young adults. And then I had this epiphany the other day where I was with my son, who is now 14, but he was 12, I think it was at the time, or 11. Yeah, he was 11 or turning 12. And we already had these form of discussion of reaching that stage. And we went to, so we don't have video games into my house, as you might have assumed. And we went to an arcade, and I wanted to try VR for the first time. So yeah, this you put this mask on, and you're in this virtual world. And again, we weren't doing any killing of any kind, but it was an experience that I wanted to try. And when I removed those, I had this massive headache, first off, difficulty concentrating. But when I went to the restroom, put some water in my face, and then I realized that if you add robotics, VR, AI, and you merge it all under the umbrella of pornography, these children don't even stand a single chance of having a healthy, meaningful community or relationship. And that's not just for children, that's also for adults that
Hmm.
believe, that's a lot of people nowadays that believe that they've made so much mistakes in their life that they just can't retrain the brain, or that somehow they've never heard about neuroplasticity, which obviously you you do. So you
Hmm.
understand that the idiom that people would use to say you can't teach an old dog some new tricks is bogus, and it's an excuse, a cope, because you can
Hmm.
retrain your brain, you can rewire your brain no matter the age. And so that's why, to me, again, I based myself on recognizing patterns and really rooting my identity into Christianity. And so that
Hmm.
really truly helped me in that sense, for me.
And it sounds like your experiences with it have put it on your radar in your parenting and with your son. Because I do think kids are so vulnerable because they're quote unquote chronically online. And, I think if you walk through my house, you would see just devices everywhere and like there's screens everywhere. And with each of those devices, they're connected to the internet. and that's like a liability. Like, and I think that's not just me in my house. That's, I have young kids myself. I think that's just the average household, family household, is there's screens everywhere, tons of internet access, and each one of those things are a liability because I completely agree with you. It is like an addiction, because it's so powerful and there's just endless novelty, endless access, free from anywhere as long as you've got an internet access somehow. And so yeah, it's really dangerous and really concerning. How did you how did you overcome it? You said it's no longer a part of your life. What was that journey like?
I was difficult because, again, at first, my narrative was I'm not doing anything wrong.
Hmm.
I saw it as um, just a normal pattern of bodily release. I was even talking to some psychologists or even to
Hmm.
some padres, which are military religious leaders in their field. And and they didn't see anything wrong in my behavior, which again, that's where the narrative should have shifted automatically. And
Hmm.
so I had to create this form of pattern or this system in place. And then because I looked at certain types of I looked at all sorts of ways to quit. I thought it
Hmm.
was about blocking yourself. I thought it was, and what I found was that there were four key points that
Hmm.
were essential. So instead of looking at 12 points or which are too complicated and too complex to even remember for even the healthiest brain out there, I looked at four key factors. So the first, so I put the acronym as RISE. R is recognizing patterns. And so that's essentially the four key points of how when you read the book Atomic Habits, you've probably
Hmm.
read that book, very famous. So when you look at those four, they all fit in within recognized pattern.
Hmm.
So I is identity. So what is your identity rooted in? So again, I had to say I am a Christian man, and as a Christian man, I don't want my son. I have to discipline my kid, so I don't want him to partake in certain types of behaviors, and I should be the leader and lead by example. So therefore, I'm not
Hmm.
going to indulge in this type of garbage that is of the world, and really make a commitment to that identity. For example, into my house, we don't have video games, and the reason is, well, we have chess, like chess.com. So, but again, uh, it's it's a fun interactive game that we can play together. We have lots of chess boards in the house and lots of interactive games, but they are not about sexual behaviors or about violence. And
Hmm.
I would say that the average 6 year old has seen more than the majority of the military. Even I, again, I don't know exactly about the special forces, but I would have no, like, I would not be too far off if I would say that the average special forces have seen less combat than a
Hmm.
6 year old nowadays. And that's because they are 24 hours 7, just going into missions constantly, shooting people in the head and exposing their body in such a graphic way. So again, rooting your identity in such a constructive way. So creating this system of value.
Hmm.
And then S is for structure. So creating that structure around it. So
Hmm.
it was not about, at first, it was about removing it completely from my life. But again, it was about creating that structure. So at first, what the problem that I had was I put blockers on my phone. And so
Uh-huh.
the brain, the way it's wired, is to fix problems, is to create solution. And so when you tell a client or anybody, or even if you tell yourself and if you want to rewire your brain, change your patterns, if you tell yourself there is a problem there, then your brain is automatically geared towards creating that problem. Hence why we have a lot of marital problems because the men want to fix those issues, but sometimes they just have to listen. So that's the hard part. So
Yes.
yeah, so creating that structure was not necessarily to block it completely and creating that loophole or that workaround. It
Mm.
was about, again, creating that structure sometimes to have a person. So for me, I started calling individuals that at first I called my dad. And my dad said, "No, I don't want to be your accountability partner with this. Hey, this is gross. I don't want to hear these things." And I said, "Okay, well, I'm going to switch." Right? So I'm going to switch to somebody else. So I try to find a structure that would fit my lifestyle. I still needed my phone, and right now my phone is unlocked, but it's been years that I did not indulge in this type of content. And that's because I created that structure into my life. I rooted that identity in my values. I can recognize the pattern. If it's late at night, I'm on the computer, I've been working really late. I understand, okay, well, this can be triggering. Let me just switch off, do something else, and then there's no multitasking that can happen. And then E, as you might have seen with the Epic Deca, with all of these achievements that I have done, it's the E. And E is engage in healthy challenges. And so you must
Hmm.
be challenged, which create this level of solution, but when you're engaging in it. So again, recognizing pattern, identity, structure, and then engaging in healthy challenges.
Yeah, and the RISE system sounds so useful and so helpful. It seems like it could be mapped onto a lot of different issues, but you were able to kind of be creative with it and map it onto issues with struggling with pornography. And then maybe kind of, if you don't mind talking about that a little bit more, because I see it intersecting with a mental health topic that I think is really important. And this is interestingly enough, JD, I've got several clients reaching out to me, prospective clients, male clients, wanting to seek counseling services with me to work on this issue because it's affecting their mental health, it's affecting their relationships. There's feelings of shame, regret, remorse, um, and something that I just completely stole this from AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. But there's this saying in AA called it goes like this. It says you're as sick as your secrets. And so I see men struggling with pornography, they feel shame and then they stay in the shadows. They stay in the darkness. Um, which gives them this kind of false sense of safety and protection, right? But it only serves to kind of insulate them from change and growth, and so they just fester in the darkness, and it grows and morphs and evolves over time and gets worse and worse and worse. And so then I'll see men again come into therapy dealing with depression, anxiety, strained relationships. Um, Dealing with the pornography issue, but then maybe that bleeds into other addictions. And so it's a whole nasty um, spider's web of issues that come up. I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit. Is how did it impact you when maybe you were trying to quit, trying to change, but couldn't and felt stuck? And what was that like for you?
For sure. Um, so in Christianity, sin abides in darkness. It's only God or Jesus that is part of the light. And so it's part of that cycle, again, having that shame of keeping that secret, but that what men are living is that they're not able to speak about it, or a lot of men nowadays don't have these individuals that they know for a fact are not going to speak about it. For me, I was blessed that at such a young age, when my parents got divorced, um, my mom said you have to see a psychologist, and I went to see that psychologist, and he broke confidentiality, and so he kept his job, everything went fine. But I told my mother, I said he said things that I said, and he broke confidentiality. And why I said it was a blessing is because I was not able to trust these individuals anymore. So as a result, that created some level of protection. So people have to understand, especially men, that vulnerability is based on our innate ability of protecting or desire of protection. So we, as men, see it more of, if we look at it in terms of survival, and I would say you've never been in a military situation, but I would say we have a castle and we have a weak point. Where would you attack? And so even if you were
Mm,
never in the military, you would attack at that weak point. And so there's a difference between vulnerability and weakness. A vulnerability can be a weakness, but it's not a weakness and also can become your strength once you're able to find the
mm,
key individuals in your life. So, for example, the strongest marriages out there are understanding of the vulnerable points of their partner. So, one key factor that shouldn't be triggering for anybody is their love language. You should never, ever, ever reveal your love language, the love language that you have with your wife or your husband, to anyone. And
mm,
that's because if that person uses it, let's say it's touch. If I go to someone's wife and it's touch and I start touching her shoulder because it's her love language, I am now in her mind already in stage one. And so
mm,
that's a vulnerable point that shouldn't be triggering to anyone if we're just discussing, right? In terms of especially addiction, which can be a triggering topic that a lot of people don't want to talk about. For me, for years, I did not want to talk about it, let alone go on a podcast where millions, if not more, can see that interview. Where now I understand that it is a vulnerable point, but I see it more as a strength because now the business is not created for people to have behavioral addictions, but I would see that a lot of people have behavioral addictions that plague their life and hurt their mental health. And so we do deal with a wide range of clientele, male clients and so we deal with the physical, the mental, and then also the spiritual side. So understanding really the difference between vulnerability and weakness is a key factor for everyone, and understanding who these individuals are that will not break that trust, or they might break it, but you're willing to take that risk in order to
mm,
create some form of strength point, which it
mm,
can be, by the way. It can almost be a, like, if let's say we take the analogy and we circle back to that castle metaphor, if I say to you and you are the enemy, here is my weak point, there
mhm,
is my castle, and you understand that there is a weak point there. If I send all my soldiers into that weak point, now it became a strong point. And so,
mm,
where your attention goes, then your entire body flows. And so, making it really serious, that's why the I is important, because in Rise, is because now you have your identity rooted into that system and understanding this is my weak point, or it is a vulnerable point. I don't want it to be weak. Therefore, let's send more soldier into, let's strategize more in a tactical way
mhm.
and send more soldier in that
Yeah.
sense.
And I think this is really an important thing to camp on a little bit more because I mean, you served in the military, you know, just anyone check out JD's book. I put it over. I don't know where I put it, but it was a great book.
Yeah.
I was going to hold
This
it up
blue
to the
bin.
screen.
There's blue bin on their side.
Okay.
The blue
And,
bin, recycling bin.
I'll link it in the video in the episode description too. So I'll include a link so you can find out more information about JD's book. But you know, in the book you go into detail and you mentioned it, the epic deca. I mean, you've accomplished so many things. And so I mean, by all accounts, JD, you're a man's man, right? You're a manly, tough, manly guy. So I don't think if anybody wants to question your manliness, they're crazy, right? But now you're saying to me, as a manly, strong soldier, warrior, tough guy, you're speaking about vulnerability as something that's noble or praiseworthy. And, you know, I'll be honest with you, I'll post a video on YouTube and I'll have men say, and I'll say something similar. You know, actually, vulnerability is a sign of strength for men, and it's a really wonderful thing. And you don't know what you're missing. You're avoiding vulnerability because it feels like weakness, and you think it will, you know, it'll be really bad for you. And I'll get men just rip me apart in the comment section and question me, doubt me, say I'm out to lunch, I'm deluded. Okay, so then, all right, fine. Dismiss me. I'm a mental health professional. You know, who cares what I have to say? But here you are. You're not a mental health professional. You're walking the talk. You're out there doing epic, amazing, incredible, challenging, hard things. And what you're telling me is there's a difference between vulnerability and weakness. Weakness sounds like something that's pretty static. A weakness is just a weak point, whereas a vulnerability is kind of a weakness that's actually kind of a strength in a way. It's a weakness and a strength, and it has like this flexibility, a weakness that can become a strength or something. But the way you're talking about it is almost like there's a strength in it, there's a nobility in it, there's a power in it. And I wonder if you see through your organization, through your speaking, I wonder if you see the same thing I'm seeing, where men are just kind of missing the point. They're not getting it, and they're misunderstanding the power of vulnerability.
Well, yeah, definitely. And that's because, and I've said it, even mental health professionals, for me, I was scarred as a result. Became a blessing. That's the way I see it. That's the way I use it. And I'm not saying that they're all the same, but by seeing all women the same, then you're again seeing it from the lens of some victim that the entire system is against you. By seeing all men are the same and are out to get you, then you are bound to not make meaningful relationships where in my most and I'm still struggling with this sometimes even in business we had we had a guy, one of the guy that is working with us is a former Navy SEAL, right? And he catches me all the time on this, and he says, JD, you got to tell me the whole story before we can make a decision. And now he's even catching me. So it's a work in progress. And it's, yes, you're right. A vulnerability can be a weakness and can be a strong point. It becomes our strong point because now I'm able to open up to certain individuals. It's foolishness when you use these vulnerable points and just share them with the entire world, but it must come
Sure.
out. You must be understanding of your limitations. What are your limits? Because if you don't understand them, then you're not able to really
Hmm.
rationally display the full potential of who that individual that you are is meant to be. By having these vulnerable points used as strength, you create these strong bonds. Once you're, say, I'm going to use a partner situation, once your wife understands these vulnerable points, and bear in mind, she might not be your accountability partner. She might not want to know that for me, it was a weak point in my marriage, right? My wife was not in alignment with pornography. She said, why? Why are you going online? And I said, well, I'm deployed. I am. So how about when I do it, I'm deployed, but when I come back and I'm not going to uh, partake in any other behaviors with a physical woman, it's all online. And she didn't understand. Now I understand a lot better because, well, I'm a Christian man, and so it was adultery. So I had to come to terms about it and understand, okay, yes, did I cheat on my wife? Well, even though it was in my head, I did. Yes. According to Jesus, yes, I did. And so if according to him I did, then I betrayed my God. I betrayed. So again, that's where the level of shame come in. And then there are certain partners that are not willing to put up with it. And then eventually it leads to certain consequences. For me, as a result, it led to a divorce. Now, that wasn't the only key factor, let's put it this way, but for the argument and for the sake of it, it was one key factor, which is sad. But again, was I the ideal leader? No, I wasn't, because my mental health was taking, or my healthy mental state was taking a back seat.
Hmm.
And now I'm much healthier in terms of mindset, and that's how I could explain again, vulnerable versus weakness and strength. It's like the similar point of emotions and feelings, right? That men should not show their feelings, or feelings are just there for a they're an experience of life. That's all they are. That's it.
Hmm.
Like, yes, I'm a firefighter, and sometimes you touch the door, it's hot. You understand you have the equipment. You're going through it. Sometimes you're happy. Sometimes you're sad. That's it. It's a feeling, right? You have to go through that door. But the emotions are different, where now you can calibrate them, and so you can understand how to manipulate your body, your bodily function, in order to perform the task that you are doing. Now, again, emotions can also be feelings, and that's why it can get tricky when we're looking at semantics and how people are explaining it. But to circle back to what you were saying about these individuals, these men predominantly that are talking about, it's because they're talking from the perspective of their experience. And yes, for the majority
Hmm.
of men, they have been, to use the term, burned. They've been burned, or they've been in a situation that is highly negative, that threw them in some form of downward spiral. And that's for, yes, I don't have the statistic on it, but I would say the majority of men have lived certain levels where they have been placed in a leadership position in some capacity, whether it's
Hmm.
with their children or with their wife, and they have been stabbed in some capacity. And a lot of men don't know how to heal. And that's because
Hmm.
we don't have schools for leadership. We don't have schools that teach how to be a decent man. Why? And that's because we've removed Jesus, which is a system of value. That's who Jesus, I mean, Jesus is the Son
Hmm.
of God, obviously, but there is a system of value in the Bible. Whether you
Hmm.
believe or not is
Hmm.
irrelevant in that case, okay, in that context, okay. I don't
Hmm.
want to dismiss
Hmm.
Christianity as a whole, but there is a system of value that was in place, that was given, a book
Hmm.
of value that was given to all the schools, teaching men and
Hmm.
women what are their roles, what value do you bring to society, and
Hmm.
here is a clear step process on how to perform these duties. Now
Hmm.
we've removed any form of standards, and we've essentially said to all of society, please, just do whatever you want.
Hmm.
Which
Yeah.
now these individuals, if we're looking at it from their perspective, because now, well, you're a doctor, so we can dive in a bit more into the neuroscience behind it. What happened with the brain is that and you know that I know that it's is that when people have this level of experience, because that's how you learn, you either learn from
Hmm.
the experience of others or you learn from your own. What happened is you create this map in your brain, which is sorted in the parietal side of your brain. And so that parietal side is essentially just storing all of these pathways of
Hmm.
memories, just saying, well, this is the story I created for myself.
Hmm.
Somewhat of an example I could use is an unhealthy relationship, which most people, most listeners have been in. So you idolize that individual. Well, when you idolize that individual and you say, wow, he's such a great guy or a great girl or she's such a great girl, then what you're doing is you're putting it into the parietal side of your brain. And now you're putting that image in there, which
Hmm.
oftentimes overrides the frontal lobe, which is where you make your decisions. Now, when you watch porn or when you indulge in certain content, what you're doing is you are taking that map of it's completely unhealthy and unachievable for most women to achieve that level of perfectness. I don't, that's not the right term, and I understand, but the highest level of standard in terms of beauty, it's unachievable for most women, even porn star, by the way,
Hmm.
because the camera lighting, everything is geared toward that. So what happened is now you're placing it inside of your brain, mapping it, and then looking for these ideal situation again and again and again. And so you're overriding too much your frontal lobe. And when you're overriding your frontal lobe, you're not able to, when you're not using a part of your body and you're only using that other side, then it's
Hmm.
using it for minimal work when it's meant to be used for facts and logic. And that's why you're supposed to use it. So by
Hmm.
rewiring your brain, by seeing healthy content, healthy behaviors with women, understanding that I understand that the society, because we've removed those values and we talked about it, yes, there is a some form of decay that is happening, but by you looking at that experience somewhat as a victim, you are like the person that is going on a car ride and seeing a car crash on the side of the road. And because you're overlooking at it, overindulging into it, well, where the mind goes, the body goes. And so what will happen is now you are veering not just yourself, but everybody around you on social media, which is again based on experiences. We've talked about neuroscience as to how it operates even inside of your brain. And so understanding that yes, you can recognize these patterns. It's not everybody that is the same. You just have to live your values. That's what I'm doing right now. I
Hmm.
am living my values according to how the Bible, I'm trying to follow it as much as and obey God as much as possible. And those are this is my system of value. And then eventually you have these individuals that see you completely differently. And so it's about rewiring the brain. So what you're doing by sharing
Hmm.
it with the people is you're at least
Hmm.
shining a light into telling people, how about you just look at the road? Instead of
Well,
looking at everything that is happening on the side, how about you rewire your brain and
right.
understand that there is a side? Because, yes, as a person that is on the practical side and not on the educational
Mm.
perspective, like with you, you're on the spectrum of psychology. Well, for me, I'm on the practical side of
Yeah.
things. I can tell you that, yes, you can rewire the brain. I'm pushing
Yeah.
40 this year, and it's been years. So these behaviors can change. You can rewire the brain, and neuroplasticity is definitely something that can play in your advantage.
Well, and it in talking and processing emotion helps you with the rewiring. And then that's the connection I'm hearing from you. And so it's like, again, I think men are not allowing themselves to experience a rewired, healthy, healed brain because we're limiting ourselves from talking about vulnerability and vulnerable emotion. And I do also just want to say, on behalf of the mental health field, I apologize deeply for that psychologist's behavior because that was wrong,
Yeah.
not just ethically but morally. him violating confidentiality and disclosing things. And so I just want to put it out there as a mental health professional, I'm calling that
Yeah.
wrong and bad. And
Yep.
mental health professionals are held to a high standard. At least in the US, I'm sure it's the same in Canada. There's a board that investigates us. You can lodge complaints and so on and so forth. So just want to throw that out there. Like
For
what
sure.
happened to you, you were perfectly justified in being distrustful of the mental health system. And I just want to say to all the listeners, we want to earn that trust. And so we hold ourselves to a high standard. Um, and then I also just want to say, JD, put you on record because again, I forgot, and you had mentioned that to me, and I saw it in your book. You're also a firefighter. So again, we're adding to the list of all the hyper masculine, manly things that you have done and achieved. Um, and then I also mentioned, am I saying it right? Epic Deca.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
So
The
you've
epic deck.
also done
Yeah.
the Epic Deca. So anybody who wants to question JD's manliness, go right ahead and you'll be cut down to size because JD, you've won all the manliness points. But again, I hear you advocating for men embracing vulnerability. And then I also hear you putting emotion and engaging with emotion in a positive light and talking about emotion, reaching out and getting help and support from others, which allows you then to experience healing and growth. And then I also appreciate your analysis of the men who maybe are critical of some of the things that I advocate for, which you and I are perfect alignment with our views on vulnerability and emotion. Everything you said are things I've said to men in counseling. Um, but then I get the criticism. And so maybe I'm just making space for you to share the criticism with me because it's lonely here. Um, but now they got to criticize JD, and JD's super manly guy, right? You can say Dan's not manly, but JD's won all the manliness awards, and I hear you very proudly and strongly advocating for those things. And so, but again, like I said, I appreciate your analysis of the men who are making those criticisms because I think what's behind that is hurt and insecurity and probably experiences where they've experienced trauma and wounding. So when I get that from men, I don't fire off a nasty response because they'll say something nasty and critical and rude to me. I don't fire off in that way. I actually try to be empathetic towards that criticism of me and the views I'm espousing because I think what's behind it is like a guy who was hurt as a boy or a young man or even a man had probably experienced betrayal and probably grew up in a system, a culture that invalidated him or made him feel ashamed or embarrassed for having a vulnerable emotion. And he never got to the, I think, epiphany or realization that you're explaining, which is no, actually, vulnerability can be strength. And actually, emotion is like living a full experience of life. Like it's the experiences of life. And like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Well,
so
yeah, let's make it clear. The vulnerability, vulnerability is a strength with the right people. So
with the right
that's
people.
just
And I
yeah, with the
completely
right
agree.
people.
I'm
So
not
that's
going
for
to run
sure.
out to somebody
Yep.
on the street and say, "Hey, here's all my
Yep.
weaknesses." No, no.
And that's
And
where a lot of people
yeah,
have gone wrong. If they
okay.
did this, then it's foolish and they just did not understand. So what they have to do is just revert back and say, well, I'm not going to overshare with certain individuals, and that's it, right? So for me, my level of
Yes.
addiction became a strength nowadays because now I'm inspiring other guys to partake in certain healthy behavior, especially Christian men. In terms of emotion, it's you can let's put it this way: you can quantify emotions. So if I
Hmm.
surprise you, your heart rate will go up and
Hmm.
then your pupils will be dilated. I can calculate that. And so
Yes.
before, we used to sell in terms of feelings because we can't quantify feelings.
Yeah.
But but emotions, you can now quantify it. And so that's why AI is now extremely useful and good at quantifying these
Yeah.
biological factors that would create a certain selling point. And that's just in terms of sales.
Yeah.
So emotions and feelings are different. They're not an experience of life. The experience of life is the feeling. That's the feeling, which we should not be listening to. That's why a lot of men are being
Hmm.
told not to listen to their feelings. So for me as a firefighter, as I use the analogy, if I'm touching the door and it's hot, despite the feeling that I have in my system or in my mind, I am to go through the door and save the person or go and do the business that I have been trained to
Hmm.
perform. But in terms of emotion, now I have learned to regulate my system. So, for example, cortisol level. So, if you are an unhealthy, or for everybody, let's start with the basic. Cortisol level is the stress hormone for those that don't know. As soon as you wake up in the morning to prepare you for your day, stress level is high. And that's just for your system to prepare you for the day. So, cortisol level is high for everybody across the board. But then if you are an unhealthy individual and don't know how to regulate it, then it takes much longer, or you might end up in some form of cycle or loop that keeps your cortisol level quite high, which at
Yeah.
that point you have difficulty even losing weight, and that's just part of your emotional reaction.
Yeah.
So, which is a body with a physiological reaction. But then if you are healthy, which I like the fact that you are bringing how to regulate your system is because now that
Right.
is exactly what I have done. I have indulged in long distance event, learning how to regulate my system, and I did this through those endurance events. Some people will go as far as lifting cars or
Yeah.
partaking in certain sports and other activities, as long as it is a healthy, or in some cases maybe the Epic Deca wasn't as healthy and
Yeah. That sounds
to,
pretty
yeah,
maybe torturous. Yeah. But can I follow up real quickly, JD, on
for
that
sure. I would
first
love that.
point, which was I think you made a really good pushback and caveat there, which was yes to vulnerability, but not just vulnerability with anyone and everyone. And I was kind of saying there as you were mentioning that, like, oh yes, yes, of course, like I'm not going to run out to someone on the street and expose all my weaknesses and vulnerabilities to them. So I think there's a level of being selective. But do you, I guess, going back to those men who would be critical of the position now that you and I hold, do you think it's, do you think that they have a critical view of vulnerability because maybe they've just chosen the wrong person to be vulnerable with? Can you
Yeah.
speculate that on that a little bit more?
Yeah, it's a level of accountability and responsibility. You are responsible for it to a certain degree, because I'm a certified naturopathic practitioner, and so that's what I
Hmm.
tell all of the patients that I have, and I tell them you are to a vast degree, but there are some cases that it wasn't your fault, but you are the creator of your own health. You are the creator of your success. And then what I have discovered throughout my practice is that the majority of people don't want success, whether it's financial success, health, or even healthy mental health. And when I say that, I get a huge pushback. And all I'm saying is everybody wants to be on top of the mountain, but how many people really want to go through all of the steps that it takes to get to the top of the mountain? Everybody wants that doctor title because it holds a certain level of status.
Mhm.
And how many people are willing to go through, and I don't know for you, but generally it's about 10 years of university and higher education, and we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars and going into debt, and then we're talking about having trying your best to hold all of these juggling balls in the air while having a healthy relationship and being a father now. So
Mhm.
all of this, all of these factors have to be taken into consideration.
Well, and you mentioned like your wife, and so like, if you're blessed to have like a great relationship, that's the person you want to be vulnerable with, you know? So it's because I get it. Like my advice, if you misapply it and you say, yeah, just be vulnerable with everyone, well, that's wrong. Don't do that. And I wouldn't advocate for that. But I feel like that's a straw man. Like that's not what I'm suggesting. If it's your best friend, if it's your family member, if it's like a close confidant, if it's a mentor, you know, if it's someone that you're trying to build a relationship with, if it's your kid, if it's your spouse, be vulnerable. And I see men actively not being vulnerable with those relationships. And so, of course, I'm not advocating go run out to somebody on the street and be vulnerable with them. But with the people that you care about the most, that are your loved ones, why not? You know what I mean? Like you're just limiting yourself in terms
Mm,
of like the closeness and connection. And there's so much research, JD, we don't have time to get into it tonight, but there's so much research that supports social connectedness as being a huge buffer to depression and anxiety and a
mm,
promoter of human flourishing and well-being. So it's not just like I'm not just advocating for people doing things that diminish anxiety and depression. That's kind of a deficit model. What do you do to reduce bad things? But I'm also suggesting what do you do to increase good things? That's like a flourishing model. And social connectedness is a key factor. I don't know how you achieve connections with others that are meaningful without vulnerability. If there's another way to do it, I'm you know I'll pay you $10. You know, this is open to the internet, right? If you've got another way of creating a meaningful, close connection with another human being that doesn't involve vulnerability, I'm all ears because I think vulnerability is the gateway drug to close, meaningful connections with others. I don't know how else to achieve it, and I see
for
us
sure.
guys chronically limiting ourselves to do that. So, um,
Yeah, for sure. I'll
JD,
take the
thank you.
$10.
You'll take the $10.
Yeah, I'll take the $10 because again, there is one guy that was sharing with um, that was sharing that every single relationship is a triangle, and so you're at each end, and so God is always at the top, and so uh, it's about
Mm,
following Christ. It's about having this system of value, and by again uh, being with having a relationship with God, then you can have a relationship. So that again, it is part of it, right?
mhm.
Vulnerability would be eventually part of it, but not at the initial point. The initial point would be based on Jesus Christ. If we take
Yeah.
it at face value and we use it as an example, having a healthy relationship with a wife or a partner as a result of certain behaviors that, say, a man has done, or maybe vulnerable points. And we take recognizing pattern, identity, structure, and then engage, that person would recognize the
Mm,
pattern of how they should share it with their wife. When is the appropriate time, and not putting on the back burner until
yes.
things are boy over boiling or spilling all over the place, but understanding that they recognize the pattern, they understand the patterns of their wife, and then they're able to share in that specific moment because
Yes.
that's the part where
There's
they're
a wisdom
now they
to
have an
it.
identity as a husband to
Right.
be part of their life. And as a result, I love the way that you put it, where vulnerability should be at the center of it all, and then creating that structure around your marriage in order for it to flourish and be an
Mhm.
example for everybody. Because again, how many I can turn on my Facebook and see a plethora of divorce cases or individuals that are um, taking part in sexual behaviors with other partners, and that's just unhealthy behaviors. But if now you have this beautiful marriage, then again, in Christianity, that's what demons don't want. They don't want you to be a solid example for everybody to have this beautiful marriage. So how about you be that example instead of being part of a statistic, which is highly negative in terms of a world view. and then engaging in healthy challenges, because
Mhm.
engaging in healthy challenges, every single woman out there loves to be challenges, love to be challenged a little bit, and love these small games. And so now at that point, then you're able to be vulnerable, because once you're in your masculine space, then the woman is able also to be in her feminine space. And so that's one way, which is not geared towards behavioral addiction, but that, as you mentioned, can be used in all sorts of different ways. The RISE mentality or acronym.
Yeah. Well, JD, I don't want to keep you too long and take up so much of your time, but you've been so generous with spending an hour with me and talking with me about your book and your life and sharing your views on mental health. And so this has been really wonderful. And so just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast and the channel. And then any last words to, and maybe just speak to men and mental health, and any last word to that you want to say to any men out there struggling with some of the things that we've discussed.
Yeah, well, in my book, my favorite quote is if your goals don't scare you, set the bar higher. But oftentimes the enemy is already inside of you. And so you got to battle out the enemy inside of you before you can even face the whole world. And it is neuroplasticity is definitely a thing, and you can teach an old dog some tricks.
I love it. Awesome. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, JD.
Thank you for
All
having
right.
me.
Absolutely. All right. Take care.